So, as announced, my name is Bart. I'm in the RPKI team at the RIPE NCC, and we run the RIPE NCC Trust Anchor for RPKI. Something was flickering the screen. I think we're good now. So today I want to talk to you about some of the recent developments in RPKI, some of the things our team has been busy with lately, some of the things going on in the community. But also I would like to start talking a bit about RPKI adoption. Of course, this morning it was mentioned, Gerardo just mentioned it, so I'll briefly skip through it. But at May 22nd this year, the week of the RIPE 86 in Rotterdam, we finally reached the 20,000 CA certificates in our repository. We celebrated that with cake in the routing working group. But it shows that RPKI is growing, and it's growing well. Usage is growing well. We also see that on the ROA part. Roughly 62% at the moment of our full IPv4 space at RIPE is covered with ROAS. 37% of IPv6 is covered with ROAS. And if we zoom into the region of Eastern Europe, we see roughly similar numbers, a bit better than average on IPv4 space, a bit worse on IPv6 in some cases. One of the explanations we think for IPv6 is that unannounced space is, there's a lot of unannounced space in IPv6. Unannounced space meaning things that are not BGP announced. They are included in our statistics, and that shows a lower number for IPv6. We do recommend creating ROAS on unannounced space, and it might seem weird, but space that you don't use, you still don't want someone else to use or to announce. So you can create a ROA on AS0 for that space and prevent other people to effectively use that space. It's some trick that we do recommend to actually do. If we look at validation, as Gerardo showed, there's not much filtering going on at the moment. It is important to filter routes, and we really urge you to ask your providers to do ROV. If you're an internet exchange or you're a big ISP, then please talk to us. Consider doing ROV. Come to the session tomorrow so we can discuss it a bit better. And so far, a quick update on statistics. Much more is covered earlier on, of course. Before I start talking about what we've been working on, some of the highlights that we did last year, I want to introduce the team because RIPE is very serious about investing in RPKI. It's a very serious thing. And this is the team that makes that possible. From left to right, top to bottom, there is Natalie, Misha, Ties, yours truly. There's Stella, who's also in the room here. There's Max, Egla, and Eric. And this is the team that does all the operational stuff on RPKI, implements new features, follows the community, follows the IETF, etc. Now let's talk about what's been going on the Trust Anchor, and start with explaining a bit how our Trust Anchor works. So we have three variants. The most commonly used one is hosted RPKI. Hosted RPKI basically just means RIPE NCC maintains your keys. You use our tools to create objects, to create ROAS statements, and we publish the ROAS statements to our repository. So we manage everything for you. We provide you software to create your ROAS. It can be through the RPKI dashboard or through the management API that we provide. So if you like to script, you can do that too. There's few people with lots of ROAS that use that API to their convenience. And we host everything for you. So it's a very convenient option. Sometimes, however, you want to run your own CA software. Can be many reasons for that. Some companies, big companies, wrote their own CA software or use other software to more conveniently create their own ROAS statements because they have so much space. There might be other reasons, such as you can maintain the key pairs of your ROAS. It also means you have to have your own CA software, you need to host your own CA software, and you have to publish to your own repository. Sometimes that's what you really want, but you are responsible to have that repository up. Your CA software doesn't need to be up constantly or have a very high availability. It just needs to be reliable. Your repository, on the other hand, is queried, well, probably every other second at the moment. There's a lot of validation done in the world, and all these validators will hit your repository constantly, asking for updates. It can be a bit of a burden to actually host that yourself. And that's where the third flavor of that comes in. Publication as a service, and that's something we worked on the last years. Still means you run your own CA software. It still means you maintain the key pairs, you use your own CA software to create and publish your ROAS, but your CA software will publish it to a dedicated repository that is hosted by the RIPE NCC. It's a special publication as a service repository. Now that repository is high available. It's monitored by us using our monitoring tools, our standard monitoring tools that we use for our main repository as well. And it means you don't have to go through the burden of hosting the RDP and rsync repositories. This form is also known as hybrid RPKI or publishing parent by some of the other RARs that support this model. And hosting repositories can be somewhat of a burden, as we learned at RIPE. Our current repository setup for RDP is to have redundancy built in, not just in our publication server, which we run redundantly. There's redundant CDNs in front of them. If any of our CDNs has connectivity issues in the world, and we notice that, we immediately switch to the other CDN, effectively reducing downtime to at most 5 minutes. If you have to do that yourself, you can imagine you have to go through a whole lot to actually reach that level of availability. And this is what publication in service or publication in parent helps you with. We're also working on scaling up our rsync repositories. Effectively, rsync is mainly used as a fallback mechanism for RDP. If the RDP repositories ever become inconsistent or there's long availability issues, validators will fall back to rsync. And using rsync, rsync is not built for scale per se. Our current or old repository setup couldn't handle a full fallback of all the validators. It could be at some point, but since all the RPKI growth, we couldn't know more. So we created a new tool, rsync, which effectively follows our RDP repository and constantly, every minute, updates and creates a new rsync repository from it, allowing us to horizontally scale our rsync repositories and support all the validators at the same time, falling back to rsync. Something else we invested in is not just run redundant setup of everything on our own, in our own data centers, in our own network. We also run an external publication server, full standby repository that we actually had to switch to for a brief moment this morning because we had some on-premise issues. The last thing we want is our RDP repository and our rsync repositories being down for a long time, where RDP takes priority for us. So we aim to have close to 100% uptime for our RDP repositories. We run an external repository, a full uncorrelated failure mode external repository, so we can switch to that at any point where we deem it's necessary. We don't debug first. One thing we learned is switch first and debug later. So we're up, we're still up. We just take the system offline that we think might have connectivity issues or we saw some monitoring alert on. If it's real or not, we don't really care. We just switch first and we later on investigate, switch back if needed or if wanted. In the RPKI system, for doing route origin validation, RPKI validators are important. And over the last years, it's become a really mature ecosystem with different validators. There are 4 or 5 big validators out there right now. They're listed on the screen, and like our validator, that bootstrapped RPKI, is deprecated. We were at version 3, and we finally deprecated it and abandoned it. It's end of life. In case you run it, please stop using it and replace it with either Routinator or RPKI client. They're the most actively maintained validators out there and good stand-ins for Routinator or for RPKI validator free by RIPE NCC. Our validator has not been updated since July 2021. So you can imagine that it might have a few security vulnerabilities at the moment that went unpatched. The RPKI validators were target of security research done in 21 as well. The full research is published at the link on the slide. It resulted in some fixes across all the validators. Also contributing towards the maturity of the validators and of the ecosystem. And before I look at the roadmap a bit, I want to say that open source is also very important for us. We run a trust anchor, which means that you have to trust us for doing the right thing there. Otherwise, if we can't be trusted, we're just an anchor, and that's kind of useless. One of the things we do to gain trust is to publish the source code of things we write. So we published our full CA software 2 years ago. I did a talk in the open source community back then on how we actually did that and achieved that for publishing 10-year-old software. But it's up for review on GitHub. Anyone can review it. Every change we make is published there. Same for the RPKI publication server we run, with the difference being that active development is done on GitHub because it was open source for the beginning. The new tool I mentioned, RSyncIt, the tool that builds an rsync repository from RDP, is also open source from the start. You can follow along if you're interested in that development. And we aim to open source our RPKI monitoring tools. It's the tool that we wrote ourselves to monitor the consistency of our repositories and the publication time to various endpoints and mirrors of a repository. Like I said, we have a very redundant setup. One thing we want to know for sure is that all these repositories are in sync with each other at some point in time. It's not to the second, but you really want to know that the repository is in sync before you fail over to that instance. If it's out of date, then we need to take it offline and fix that as well. That monitoring software is subject to being open sourced as well, and that should happen anything in the near future. More of the open source from RIPE is found at our GitHub, RIPE-NCC. Which brings me to the last bit of this presentation. Talk about our roadmap a bit, some of the future developments in RPKI or for our team. We're building a new RPKI dashboard. The current dashboard is over 10 years old and a 10-year-old code base. We're replacing it with something very modern, a modern front-end stack. And we hired a UX designer to improve user experience in the RPKI dashboard. And this will be done in multiple stages. First of all, we'll just basically create a clone of the current dashboard. Not exactly a clone, we'll have a few improvements, but it will roughly have a similar look and feel. And after that, we aim to do user experience improvements, help you to do better alerts, better creation or better feedback on what ROAS you need to create. We're also working for our trust anchor on SOC 2 compliancy. We're replacing our current Enshield HSMs with new ones. The aim is to do that this year as well. And we're looking towards integrating route management in the RPKI dashboard. The last bit has been on a roadmap for a long, long time now. We wanted to rewrite the dashboard first before we make substantial changes in it. So we're close to get that done and be able to reach these features and implement them as well. Something else that's not listed here that's still on our roadmap is new object types. In the community, there's been discussions and close to RFCs or RFCs for new object types in RPKI, including path validation, RSC, and BGPsec. We also aim to implement them. We do that API first. As I told you earlier, we have a management API. We like this way of developing by first scripting against it. It attracts a subset of people that actually use these objects, which gives us some feedback. And after that, we also aim to implement management for that in the RPKI dashboard. And that's all I have. Thank you for listening. If there's any questions, feel free to ask them now or just talk to me in a hallway chat. And thank you for listening. No questions?
I think we don't have any questions. Do we have? No? Thank you. Thank you, Bart.